Welcome to SEC Football Live from 440 Sports, brought to you by ML Rose. That is Stephen Godfrey. I'm Braden Gall. I am back from Mobile after many oysters and many late nights. Godfrey, good to see you again. It's been a while. How are you, sir?
How was the on-site reportage? I feel like we swapped roles.
we did. We had access. I was down there for Titans coverage, obviously the number one pick. That's all people care about. Did get to chat with a bunch of college coaches that are, of course, down there. I'm not sure what exactly college coaches are trying to accomplish other than promote their guys. But no, lots of gossip, man. Lots
get
of
jobs. Try and
yeah,
get jobs.
That's exactly correct. Like you saw them, Shannon Dawson hanging out down there, just kind of promoting Cam Ward and all of his other offensive weapons. But
sure,
no, it's a good time. It's fun. Lots of gossip, lots of tea. Feels like I'm kind of in high school again. go after 9 p.m. You're just there, kind of learning stuff. And as a college as a college junkie, I found it fascinating to gain all kinds of insight into the NFL because I've not been deep in the weeds on an NFL beat before.
Yeah,
I have been since I launched my company. I've now been sort of covering the Titans for the last 4 years. But it's my first time down in Mobile. It's my first time in the city, actually. I like cities, Godfrey, that are like they're not here and they're not there. They're sort of in between. They're sort of lost. They're sort of forgotten. There's plenty of culture. There's plenty of food. You got the old coastal oak trees and the moss and the Mardi Gras prep, and I just enjoyed it. I enjoy cities that have grit. I enjoy those kind of cities, so it was good. It was fun.
I don't know if I've ever done a Senior Bowl. It
was my first.
I spent a lot of time in Mobile, and I've worked different draft stuff a little bit. It was kind of back in the day for SB Nation because, like you know, mainly a college focused career, but if you're curious and you haven't figured this out by now, football coaches, football personnel executives, GMs, whatever you like, just the biggest gossips, like the most middle school lunch table human beings in the world.
It's so much fun. Especially
after 2 beers.
Like all good lessons early in J school where it's like consider the source. You got to make sure like people are just saying all kinds of stuff. I did have a chance to chat with a couple of SEC coaches. Those conversations will remain off the record, but we'll get to this in a minute because I want to touch on the ACC TV contract with ESPN. What does that mean for stability in the sport? When's the next big benchmark? I think that SEC and other college football fans need to know about. The House settlement ruling is pending, I believe, for the college basketball championship night, April 7th. Is when the judge is set to rule on that, which is hilarious irony in my opinion. And so I'm curious, because that was a lot of the conversation from the college coaches. It's just sort of to be expected, roster management as well as, how do we evaluate this guy? How do we evaluate that guy? What's the right price point for this? Signing day is today. I didn't even realize that until I woke up yesterday. And I got started at rivals.com, in the heart of the recruiting world. And now it's such an afterthought that the most interesting part of National Signing Day is that no one gives a shit about National Signing Day anymore. But there's some interesting stories there. Obviously, I want to talk coordinators with you. I want to talk there's Bama, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Florida. A lot of these teams have changed coordinators. I'll be fascinated to see your thoughts on some of the names, but also the strategy. I was having this discussion with somebody else that's very smart around this product, and it's sort of he asked me, why am I interested in Ben Arbuckle at Oklahoma? And I said, I don't know if it's going to work, but I'm fascinated by the experiment. Okay. And I want to see what that's going to look like. So I want to pick your brain on that. Reminder, though, however, if you are in the greater Nashville area and you would like a fantastic meal for you, the missus, or the mister, or the kids, fantastic place for kids, ML Rose, 6 great locations. A 7th location is coming. Fantastic sort of beer Sherpas. They take all the best local beers, put them on the taps, but they're very careful about what beers they put on their taps. They're sort of like a perfect beer Sherpa if you're in Nashville and you want to taste all the good beer that we brew in this city. So come on by ML Rose. Great burgers, outstanding. They got the spicy chicken, whatever that is, the buffalo chicken wrap. That's delicious. Right. The ranch dressing is fantastic. They got all kinds of delicious stuff. So make sure you check it out. And TV's everywhere. Excellent vibes. If you're a vibes guy, vibes are good in ML Rose. So it's a good family spot.
Good Super Bowl spot.
It is technically. So go check that out. ML Rose, of course, 6 great locations. Bo says, Giga Maggies, who is our defensive coordinator? Is it Jay or Lyle?
Ooh, I didn't have there we go. Okay, sorry. I didn't have the comments pulled up.
There you go.
First, we've got an A&M question first. Love it.
Yeah,
All right.
very different. Very different. Eddie, of course, says when people say it just means more, they mean what the state of Georgia is trying to do to NIL right now.
That's not a bad place to start, because what Eddie is referencing is the fact that it looks pretty likely there will at least be a state law in Georgia that separates tax obligation from NIL payments. And you think, okay, all right, that's not revolutionary necessarily, considering the last 5 years worth of changes in the sport. But it is exactly, I kind of like the way Eddie framed that, where we talk about it just means more. And last time I was on the show, I talked about this. There's been this sort of building narrative about, hey, the Midwest is back. I don't think it ever went anywhere, but I mean, you're talking about Michigan and Ohio State and back-to-back titles. With the House settlement coming, and I know you want to talk about that too, there is always going to be an aspiration to do more for your school or your conference or your area or whatever. And, the SEC, as craven and morally ambiguous as it can be, and oftentimes is very much an innovator in that space, to say the least. And
they wear that as a badge of honor.
Yeah, like, it doesn't shock me at all that a Southern state was like, oh yeah, don't worry about taxes. So yeah, we'll pay your taxes. Like, yeah, this doesn't shock me at all. This is the kind of thinking where someone has look, we got a 9-month off season, right? And so we're going to sit around and be like, what can we do to gain an advantage here? By the way, like, Braden, you cover the Preds. I know this is discussed in the NHL. It's discussed in the NBA a lot too. I mean, honestly,
income tax.
all pro leagues. But Tennessee doesn't have a Major League Baseball team, but Tennessee and Florida and Texas are really, really appealing in the NHL, especially because taxes, you have such a wider spectrum of taxes where you talk about Canadian taxes, being a foreign national, playing somewhere like California. Look, I know they're not great this year, and I'd love to find out why, but like the Predators are very appealing.
Steven, I was in the locker room yesterday. They don't know why.
Yeah, I know. That's all. Go ahead and plug the show. Actually, do that.
Check out the Gold Standard, by the way, and lowerbroadhockey.com.
Yes, I do. Yeah, I listen to those shows because I think all of us are on a little bit of a vision quest right now to figure out what is happening to our hockey team.
You know how you talk to enough college coaches. Now, I don't know how face-to-face you get during the season. When a coach is like one win away or one loss away from getting axed, like, however many of these SEC coaches they are. So very rarely can you read it on a man's face. Is
that where we are?
It's just hard. He sounds broken, man. Like, anyway, this is not a Nashville Predators show, but he sounds broken. Go check it out. Gold Standard if you care about the Nashville Predators, Lower Broad Hockey.
But anyway, if you're a pro franchise in Florida or Tennessee or Texas, and all other things are equal when it comes to a free agency decision, state of New York, state of California, taxes will kill you, especially if you're someone who makes $15 million a year. So this doesn't shock me at all. The state of Georgia would do something like this. And guess what? You know what's going to happen? Other states are going to follow.
Bing, bing, bing. Yep. So let's clarify. This is to remove the risk of changing the university to the tax exempt status, so that the players aren't charged with income tax based on NIL contract deals in the state of Georgia. Am I getting that correct? Just to make sure.
Yes.
Clarify. Okay.
Couple things here. Bill is proposed. It's in the Senate of the state of Georgia. It would exempt college athletes from state income tax on NIL deals.
Here we go.
Basically to aid recruiting. So I'm making these numbers up, so just bear with me. If you normally would hold a tax burden of something like 12% on $1 million of NIL, then you would not owe that 12% to the state. And so, again, what they're assuming is, it's actually kind of funny. We're framing this maybe the wrong way, Braden. What they're probably looking to do is to rush this, and so that they can actually compete against their peers in the South. So if you're a kid, you're in the state of Georgia, let's just say right now we're going to get $1 million, okay, in NIL. Right. And hypothetically, you would have to give 12% to the state of Alabama or something like that. But
if you're making $1 million, it's probably closer to 25%, honestly.
Yes. Well,
because you're
state and federal. I mean,
your tax bracket. I mean, you get over 180 grand, 200 grand a year in revenue, you're up to the 24% tax bracket. In generally speaking.
So in theory, you'd look at, okay, so let's say it's about $250,000, something in that range, right? If you could shave 12% of the state obligation out of that, or 10% of it, that is going to be an incentive. They think, again, this is a hypothetical, If it was between Auburn and Georgia and Florida, for instance, the kid would then go, oh, well, I could actually make an additional $100,000 if I went to Georgia.
So real quickly, what's funny about you bring up the NHL thing? There's these new contracts that this is not what I was planning on talking about, but I am interested in this. Okay. There's some NHL contracts that have been signed recently with players in California that are deferring the payment over like a 20-year period of time or a 10-year period of time, well beyond the life of the contract. And if I am a college kid who may not have any value in 3 years after playing college football, because we know the hit rate on college recruits is not exactly 100%.
Right.
And I acknowledge 17, 18, 19-year-old males, not exactly fully developed brains, not always going to be thinking long-term, big picture.
Great decision makers.
But hypothetically, if you had somebody in your corner sort of that's very smart looking out for you, if you were to tell me at 19 years old, hey, look, I'm going to give you $100,000 every year for the next 10 years, regardless of what happens, that's some really smart shit. So that doesn't apply to this situation. It's worth noting because you brought up hockey, California.
You know where it does apply? Taxes, actually, because that you were just talking about brackets and you were talking about how much you would get hit.
There you go.
If you have great management or a good family around you, the idea of, dude, my life would have been exponentially changed from the age of 22 to 32.
I know.
If I'd had any guaranteed income or anything I could rely on instead of being just completely busted. That would be the smartest thing possible. I think certainly in the case of a and look, things happen, development player. I get it. We know the stories about 2-stars and walk-ons that go to the NFL. But by and large, if someone were to say, hey, guy, maybe you're a group of 5 player, that's a better example. If you could tell someone, here's $80,000 a year, here's $50,000 a year for 15 years,
dude.
As long as you have the right people around you to convince your dumb 18-year-old brain how good that is.
You don't need the $300,000 Lamborghini. You need the $80,000 paycheck when you're trying to buy a fucking house when you're 27 years old and you're not an NFL player. That's what you need,
buddy.
So again,
this is getting real dad right now.
Your car's going too fast. Okay, slow down, kids at play. So here's the thing about like, this reminds me of Urban Meyer going to the Big Ten. And like all these Big Ten recruiting guys, Mark D'Antonio and Paul Christ at Wisconsin at the time, and all these folks that are just like, how'd you come up here and break all these unwritten rules of recruiting and pulling a player who's been committed? And that seems so foreign to SEC folks. But that's what this feels like to me, is that, to your point, the SEC, if there's a way that water can find its level and they have a way to sort of, especially with all these legislative bodies, because the Tennessee state legislative body and the attorney general here, Jonathan Skrmetti, was a huge part of suing the NCAA. And so Tennessee, like these SEC schools and these state legislative bodies, which are, mostly very conservative, are extremely pro athletes' rights because they want their team to win. And that's a good spot where we can all find some agreement here, which is pay the players. Now, my question isn't, I want to do coordinators, but we'll do that second now that we're already off on this tangent or already off on this topic. The House settlement has, and it's impossible to sort of read through all the potential legal projections on this. I'm not a lawyer. Yeah. It's really hard.
My advice is don't.
But two of the things that feels like I do kind of understand.
Okay.
Is number one, Title IX implications, which is if we're just going to pay a ton of money to football players and basketball players because they make the most revenue and they're worth that market value, fair, that sort of does fly completely in the face of Title IX. So I don't know how they reconcile that between the court cases and the judge and future litigation. I don't know. But I do think the other one is sort of this tax status, this tax exempt issue. How do you, like the states and the universities? There's all this other stuff that, again, is super complicated. If all of a sudden a school is paying employees, that they lose some status in there that they've benefited from for a very long time. So I don't know. It's very hard to sort of follow and track all the details. I think at the top level, what you need to know is big power schools, mostly the SEC. Most of the SEC is in that group. You're going to need about $18 to $22 million budgeted to pay your players in revenue sharing every year. That's it.
Yeah,
that's it.
I'm actually going to write this down because I'm going to branch off into a couple of things here. But the goal of what I'm about to say is to actually keep this as simple as possible, because I think everyone, not just media, but everyone discussing this right now kind of falls into the trap. And the trap, when you talk about house, is everything's causation, not correlation. And what I mean by that is that there's a Title IX implication, there are tax implications, there are various state laws. And so the coverage of this is so big and it's so uncertain that we start playing the hypothetical game. And the reality is until the album drops, we don't know what we're hearing. So until we have
way to put it.
A piece of paper that either speaks to these issues, or, to be honest, by the way, we may not have we may not get total clarity here. There may be some litigation after the fact. What I would recommend people do is actually, I would certainly recommend this to my colleagues in the media, hang tight. We don't know exactly what's going to be impacted here. The tax status of universities, I'm confident in saying this. I don't think we will have a change in employment status to the actual football players anytime soon. I don't think they're going to rule on that specifically. What I do think is that if you're listening to this and you're a fan of a team in the SEC, the Big Ten, let's call it not North, because that would imply geography, the upper half of the ACC and the upper half of the Big 12, you're fine. As far as title,
starts to get tricky real fast. You move down.
It does. Oh, it does, definitely. I mean, it's funny, as I don't want to out who I spoke to about this, but some of the lower end Big 12 and ACC schools and schools that have moved, especially recently, like, they're not as financially equipped as they think they are right now. So I want to transition over, not because I don't want to. I think Title IX is very important. I think some of this tax stuff is very important too. It's just that I know well enough to back away from the table because I don't feel like I have a full set here to deal with. But there was a report, I've kind of fixated on this, back in October. Matt Hayes, I think his name is, it was written for USA Today, or like the USA Today network.
Yeah, I know, Matt.
I didn't see anyone follow up on this. And I brought this up on the show one time in the middle of the season, but it was like the middle of the season. There's this idea that the Big Ten and the SEC could potentially broker a deal for another television package that would be specific to or comparable to almost like the Champions League in soccer, where they would promise 8 teams from each league playing games against each other over, and I'm again making this up, but this is the way it's been discussed, a 2 to 3 week period. Or maybe it's like, in basketball, they used to have the SEC Big 12 Challenge weekend, and it would, there'd be one weekend and everyone was going to play a team from each league. And they would sell that specifically as an independent entity, as a piece of content that would not touch either the existing Big Ten or the existing SEC TV contract. This is important only because I think the relevance of this rumor or its genesis is because this would mitigate compensation revenue. This would mitigate the budget line to then add the 20 per school, the 30 per school that we think. Yeah. And because there's no other way to pull immediate revenue of that size.
We could call it an alliance, maybe, or something.
Oh, God. It would probably actually kind of have a hokey name like that.
Yeah. We could call it the Civil War. Why fuck with it? Just go right into the Civil War. Just North-South Civil War.
There's no other way to flip the revenue that fast. $20 million is not nothing at any level. Even like if you go through, for a story a couple of years ago, I had to go through Alabama's football budget and then their athletic department budget. It's like, I know we think that the SEC is invulnerable financially, but if you talk to someone who works in an athletic department, this money does have to come from somewhere, and they're deathly afraid of having hit up boosters for the better part of 15 years for facilities, then NIL, and some of these NILs are not in a great place organizationally, to then make another ask. You're not going to raise the price of tickets, but not dramatically so.
But the TV revenue now is like $900 million a year for the SEC, and that's going to keep going up. So that is different. That is different than the $400 million a year it was, 5 years ago.
But I think that's why I'm a little worried about this from both sides, because I kind of think the health of ESPN and the health of Fox as broadcast entities right now, if you pay attention to the media industry in like the larger entertainment picture, they're kind of tapped. I don't know what the market appetite would be.
I will play devil's advocate on this.
Okay.
They still own the only most important commodity in broadcast television and all
live
of media.
Events.
And all of media, that is live events, in particular, ones that deliver male audiences, sports events.
But would it be?
That is why. Now, do they have the same money as tech companies? They do not have the same money necessarily.
Well, so do you think it would be a situation like Sunday Ticket, where it wouldn't be a discussion for the usual suspects of Fox and NBC?
Okay, this is good. I like this idea. This is creative here. The SEC goes to. I mean, Apple wouldn't be a good brand. It would be.
Well, no, hang on. It can't be the SEC. It would have to be a joint venture because it would. If it's
you're talking about just this single week of games, you're talking about
potentially two, yeah, because the rights for anything else would defer to Disney.
Sure, for now,
it has to be this. Yeah, it would have to be a 5-year agreement. I guarantee you they would try and hit 20 to 25 per school, which is a lot of money. That's a lot of money.
Amazing. Where did they come up with that number?
Yeah, and then they would have to go as a joint venture. And again, the best way it was explained to me was the Champions League. So if you don't know anything about soccer, just Google it because I don't know a ton, but I do understand that format. Do they go to Apple?
So here's the thing. Netflix paid what was it, $1 billion for the 2 Christmas games, something insane, and they got upwards of 50+ million viewers for the 2 games combined. And they had enough money to pay for Beyonce to do a halftime Super Bowl type halftime show on that game on Christmas Day. They got huge numbers, the highest streamed football games ever in regular season NFL history. Andrew says there's a potential that sports have peaked. I'm not saying sports. I'm not suggesting that the medium hasn't peaked. I think it has. I think cable television as a broadcast medium, as the number one driver, has peaked for sure. Sports will never go away as the top commodity.
Nielsen thinks 65 million people watched. Thinks it's tough because streaming is not governed. Yeah.
But if you told me, and again, this is because again, this is why the ACC TV deal is important, and why SEC fans need to keep an eye on the revenue distribution negotiations that are currently ongoing in the ACC, because they've agreed to the TV deal because it's very affordable for ESPN to keep them on the hook until 2036. It's a great deal for ESPN, but they have not agreed to a revenue distribution model. And the reason you need to keep an eye on that is that it could do multiple things to scheduling. They could change and have Notre Dame play all the big brands bigger. They could do this brand thing where they're going to tie revenue potentially to TV ratings, which is bonkers. But the other schools in the ACC, probably the people you talk to, they know that the Pac-12 is a total warning shot across the bow, that if you don't get along with the big boys in your conference, you could end up like Oregon State and Washington State. Why is this important? Because those TV deals, the negotiation for the revenue distribution for Florida State, Clemson, Miami, North Carolina, maybe Louisville, maybe Virginia, I don't know who else would be in this. They want the conference opt-out to go down in 2031. Why do they want it to go down in 2031? Because the SEC and the Big Ten contracts are up in 2031. And I don't believe for one second, I know there was lots of this blustering in these conversations, that the SEC and the Big Ten to some degree are not interested in Florida State and Clemson. I think that's horseshit. I think they're not interested right now because it makes no sense financially, and they know legally they can't get access to their broadcast rights. In 2031, if those numbers go way down, kind of like an NFL buyout for a contract, if the number goes way down and Florida State, Clemson, Miami, Georgia Tech, North Carolina, whoever it might be that's above the line, can get out of the ACC deal in 2031 for far cheaper, don't tell me that there are not other conferences, including the SEC, that would not be interested in primarily North Carolina.
So remember that negotiations for deals, so when you talk about an expiry date and you say 2023 or 2031, what you're actually saying is it's about 2 years in advance of that is when initial discussions would take place with providers. That doesn't mean they're voiding any agreement. It just means that that's how long this stuff takes. Accordingly, you'll see media leaks from whatever sympathetic party needs to leverage themselves in the public platform. So start doing the math. We're going to enter the 2025 season in August. I would say that serious conversations about the next round of realignment, you might have bought yourself as college football, as a fandom, and as a culture. You might have bought yourself 2 to 3 years of some stability. Some. By the way, I don't think it's Florida State and Clemson either. I think
it's North Carolina.
North Carolina and Georgia Tech.
North Carolina is the number one. It's the biggest. It is the thing that everyone wants, is North Carolina.
North Carolina, Georgia Tech, Virginia, and then eventually you would look at Clemson and Florida State. We have joked on this show before. I know I've told this story. Clemson in a national title game was poison for ESPN.
Yeah.
They don't, I'm not saying there's be
It's
really
good
clear
for
here.
It's good for regular season games, though, and that's
sure, but it's
that's
not good when it's against Alabama. Like, that's not what they want. You spoke to this during the playoff of like, hey, there's no salt in the wound for ESPN to not have an SEC final. Right. Ohio State Notre Dame is ratings gold. By the way, it wasn't that golden. I was kind of shocked at how low it was.
I think this is a good point because I wanted to bring this up to you. I think because it was the third lowest rated championship game of the playoff era, fifth lowest since the BCS in '98, 22 million viewers. Georgia TCU was the lowest ever, 17 million viewers, and I think Alabama Ohio State, that was COVID, so that's a sort of a caveat as well. I actually think it was on a holiday, Inauguration Day, Martin Luther King Day, 3-day weekend. Point spread was bad, and the start of the game was bad. There was not, and it was later in the year. It was that whole week and a half later did damage to the. I actually think Ohio State and Notre Dame kept it afloat at 22 million. I think people are looking at it the wrong way. Does that make sense? I think people are looking at the ratings going, "Oh, how could this be so bad for ESPN?" I actually think Ohio State and Notre Dame overcame a lot of contextual circumstances to deliver a number that was kind of on par with other championship games at 22 million. So just wanted to point that out.
I'm not going to punt, but I think you hit on a bunch of mitigating factors. Look, we're not going to be the 7 millionth college football show to talk about how much Monday night sucks. We're not, but it does. And I don't think that it's funny. Like, I'm going to take this to pro wrestling for a second.
Oh,
you set up a main event.
As one want to do.
You set up a main event because you're trying to tell a story. But you need to have a very clear and understandable progress to that point. Having the two games that create your national championship in awkward, newly slotted times on weeknights does not help this process at all. I don't love it.
No, I don't disagree. Ironically, the Ohio State-Texas game was higher rated. The highest rated game of the year was Ohio State.
It's not ironic to me.
On a Friday night, a bad television night.
I think that I will say this about there's been a lot of this sort of Midwestern blush. I don't think that Notre Dame, Ohio State is the ratings gold that I think we misread that in the same way that we misread or the same way that there was a cannibalization and a lack of market balance for Alabama LSU or Alabama Clemson.
I think Texas.
There's a lot of overlap.
I think Texas and Notre Dame would have done big. Numbers.
God,
big
yeah.
I
think USC and Ohio State. I do think you have to pull from a larger part of the map.
I think, and Andrew's talking about ratings there on NFL. NFL hasn't really grown over the past decade. That's true, but they're still printing billions of dollars. They're still the top of the. They're still the top.
The way they're growing is when you go to England, Germany, or Mexico.
Yeah, numbers are going.
People are wearing Patriots and Cowboys stuff. That's how they're growing.
And the NBA figured that out a long time ago. College football has yet to figure that out because it just doesn't have the appeal. It just doesn't. But do you feel like I feel like we could crack that? Oh, for sure. You want to take the Texas Longhorns and play a game in Mexico City?
Yes.
Sign me up.
Why haven't we done that?
What, Washington in Canada? Ohio State in Canada? Yeah, sign me up.
Yeah.
Interesting ideas. I like all of that. I do think the SEC sort of taking its own broadcast package in 2031 when it goes and grabs North Carolina and then begrudgingly takes like Florida State or Clemson as like, okay, fine, we'll take them. Okay, fine. I think selling that package independent of a broadcast network, you will make more money if money is the goal, because now we've got the Big Ten. Florida State's private equity thing didn't ever come to fruition, shockingly. The Big Ten's kind of kicking the tires on it. I think private equity is generally a bad thing for the sport. I think there are some skill sets and experiences that people might be able to bring to the sport. The SEC generally doesn't need that. The Big Ten, maybe some of it does. I don't know. That's being tossed around right now. That's a huge influx of money to pay for some of this stuff. But on
can I break in? I need to break in real fast because we were promoting the show on social like at 32 minutes ago. So my feed refreshed when I moved windows. Breaking news that Melbourne, Australia is going to host the first ever NFL regular season game.
There you go.
So
they played their first one in Brazil.
That's how you grow this thing.
Yeah. They played the first one in Brazil, Packers and Eagles, week 1 this past year. They're going to play. They've played in Mexico. They're playing in Germany now. They're playing in London. So, look, I agree that that's the way to do it. Could the college game do that? I don't know. Maybe there's some expat. You start in maybe London or Germany where there's a bunch of expats and the bases with a bunch of college football fans. Maybe that's possible.
The Dublin game has worked very well, except for, I'm going to be really honest, the Dublin game is dressed up a little bit because it's something like 85% of the ticket sales go to Americans. So it's not like Ireland.
It takes time.
Is falling over themselves for Boston College. It was that like BC fans were flying over because it's actually like it's only like $200 to fly from Boston to Dublin. And so taking a game like Farmageddon there this year will be very interesting to watch.
Andrew, this is an interesting point. It says, I don't think that they're broken, sports meaning there. Just think these TV deals are done growing and you'll see contraction after tech overpays in the 2030s. I don't think I think that's an interesting conversation to make sure we're thinking about here, because it's also, here's what's interesting about the Apple MLS deal. It is designed to not really grow ratings. It is designed to produce an extremely dependable, consistent, and predictable high-quality product. So it's a niche. It's like a group of 5 product. Like they are. Yeah. Apple has said with MLS, we're going to take every soccer fan. We're not trying to bring in a bunch of new soccer fans, but we are going to cater hardcore with high-quality product to a dedicated soccer audience, knowing full well that it's the 5th most popular sport. Maybe WNBA might go right by it.
But the value prop there is one I think college football could embrace, and it's actually one as a business owner in college football that I have embraced and I've seen success with, which is that if you go after people who are highly educated, who probably are above average earners, and you don't dumb the sport down, you can actually find yes, is it a smaller piece of the pie? Absolutely. Is it a richer piece for advertisers or submodel, whatever? Yes. So I've seen a couple of Major League Baseball did this with Apple too, where they didn't try and push this as revolutionary. But if you know baseball and you watch that broadcast, you're like, dude, they're putting live probabilities up on every pitch. College football could stand to do this in some way, right? Like we could do this in some corner of the sport.
And here's the other thing about cable television. While it is we could call it a quote unquote dying part of the business, it is still a cash cow. It is still generating hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. So it doesn't, just because ESPN went from 89 million and peaked out at 89 million subscriber households across the country, doesn't mean that 76 million subscriber households isn't still extremely lucrative. It's still like it's going down slowly and it will bleed out eventually. But right now, it is still a giant cash cow for ESPN and for Disney. So let's just be very clear on that. Same with Fox Sports and FS1. All right, so there's your deep in the weeds. We've got a house settlement. By the way, that's coming. The announcement or the judge will rule on that on April 7th, the morning of April 7th, which, of course, is the morning of the College Basketball National Championship, as I mentioned, which is delicious irony, in my opinion. So keep an eye on all of that stuff. All right, let's talk a little.
That'll be an SEC event, probably, right?
Yeah, well, right for now, yeah. I mean, everybody's when Coach Hurley, the 2-time defending champion, is pissed off about SEC superiority, you know you're doing some work on the basketball arena.
I have no idea what you're referencing, but it's hilarious to me because someone told me the other day something like the whole league is ranked. Or
they're very good. They're very good. I don't have
crazy to me.
I don't have it in front of me, but Coach Hurley was basically, who again is a 2-time national champion, maybe the best coach in the sport, is like complaining about how the SEC is getting overvalued or whatever on the day during a press conference. Yeah, it was good.
That's only funny to me because when you and I started our careers roughly the same time period, God, was it bad in the SEC? Like you would finish football season, it just, oh man. I maintain that SEC baseball's arrival was fueled in part by how bad basketball season was.
And I know you hate this, but also SEC baseball's arrival fueled by ESPN. ESPN.
Right? How so?
They got big into broadcasting the tournament and broadcasting the College World Series all around. Frankly, all around the exact same time.
Yeah. Omaha.
I know because
Omaha was originally. Yeah, remember when Aaron Andrews was on that broad? Yeah, I guess you're right.
I know because I went and covered my first one in 2007. And we were there, and like we were all of Radio Row was just me and Chris Childers doing a show, and the championship baseball coach, it was or Oregon State's baseball coach, Pat Casey, I think.
Okay.
He came. So they're about to win. And this is hilarious to me because you know how paranoid schizophrenic football coaches are in the SEC.
Right.
We were doing a broadcast the morning, like 11 a.m., not like 9 a.m., 11 a.m., the day of the national championship game 2 of the College World Series championship series. And it was Oregon State versus I can't remember who. This was like right before the Michael Roth South Carolina run.
Okay.
And so we're there, and literally all of Radio Row is one booth. It's Rivals Radio on Sirius XM. It's me and Childers, and we're doing a show previewing the game. The head coach of the team about to win the championship made time to come out of the stadium to Radio Row to hang out with us for like an hour.
That's it, because it used to be more. It was like an Olympic. Yeah, it was like an Olympic sport. No one paid it any attention. It's not a problem. I confess that everything is skewed for me because I went to a school that got good at baseball basically after I left, and so it wasn't as cultural. And I know they won a World Series, so like I'm not besmirching Ole Miss. This is what I'm trying to get at. I'm married into an LSU family, and if there are LSU fans listening or watching, like I was either neutral or disinterested in college baseball, and then I married into an LSU family, and it is
you're not allowed to be that.
Such a part of the post Mardi Gras spring is like it's LSU baseball, and it's they really approach it almost as much as football.
It is. So I was a little different. I actually went to more Tennessee baseball games my last year of college than I did Tennessee basketball games because they had the number 1 pick, Luke Hochaver, and they had a couple other Major League Baseball players that were drafted, J.P. Arancibia, Julio Bourbon. This team went to the College World Series my senior year. So I kind of fell in love with college baseball through the experience of being a college student. And then to get to cover it 3 years later in Omaha for the first time ever. And now, of course, as the greatest baseball program in the sport today, as the defending national champions, it is. I love it more than anything. I love it almost as much as any other college. It's such a great sport. Mississippi State Stadium is unbelievable. The box in LSU is unbelievable. I don't have to tell SEC fans how good college baseball is. Anyway, all right. I want to talk ML Rose, by the way, for real fast. Make sure you check out ML Rose, our great sponsor. If you like this show, which, of course, I hope to think that Stephen and I give you something different than every other college football podcast out there. Make sure you're hitting subscribe on the YouTube page and thumbs up, and just share the product. Tell somebody about SEC Football Live. We do appreciate you, and obviously swing by an ML Rose location if you're in Nashville, or if you live in Nashville and you're checking us out. Make sure you hit one of those 6 great locations. Great happy hours on Saturdays and Sunday mornings. During basketball season, you can watch all those basketball games, baseball games, whatever it might be. You can get, if you're coming into town to watch your team play against Vandy baseball, make sure you swing by ML Rose, 6 great locations. Okay. I do want to talk coordinators here. And my first question is, I had a thought about the differences in hiring offensive and defensive coordinators. And some of this is because I was looking at the new names in this particular league. So Oklahoma's a big one. Brent Venables entering a huge critical year. Seth Luttrell fired in the middle of the season. They hired Ben Arbuckle, who's a very creative offensive scheme, but I am curious to see if you think it will work in the SEC. I can't wait to find out. He brings his quarterback, John Mateer, from Washington State with him. Zach Alley is out. Venables is taking over as the defensive coordinator in Norman, but also Austin Armstrong out for Florida, who was the youngest coordinator in college football, I believe, in power football.
I think so, yeah.
And now I think Arbuckle is. And I'm curious. Here's my thesis, and I haven't worked it all out, so I wanted to see what you think. I think, especially if you are a coach that is in pretty, not on hot seat, but like just you're in a pretty big year, I think hiring a young, super young, creative, dynamic defensive coordinator is far riskier than hiring the retread name that tends to be more predictable, tends to have a higher floor. You sort of know what you're getting. I'm not going to say that anyone should hire Todd Grantham, but what I'm saying is that there's a certain we just saw Jim Knowles get paid a lot of money to go from Ohio State to Penn State. Tom Allen is coming down south from Penn State to these are older guys that have been around a long time, that are sort of proven commodities. And hiring those types of guys, I feel like, is the right strategy on defense. If you're gonna go creative, young, innovative, different, sort of try to zig when everyone else is zagging, it feels like you shouldn't do that on defense. And Napier has to acknowledge that he tried that with Austin Armstrong and it didn't work. So now Ron Roberts is in, Vinny Sunseri is in as the kind of co-defensive coordinators. Roberts was already there. Is it fair to say that it's worth the risk on offense, but maybe you shouldn't do it on defense strategically?
If you are a defensive head coach, I think it might be different. I mean, Kirby Smart's a pretty good example of how this works. Pete Golding was pretty young when he got hired away from UTSA to go to Alabama. I am talking about the Saban tree, though, which has a very sort of specific tint to it. I think I'm not sure on your theory, but I'll give it a little credit in that I think you can break through and have a limited amount of success on offense as a young mind, probably faster and a little bit better than you can as a young defensive coordinator. The problem, though, is that if you lean too much in the direction you're talking about, you get like a talent rot of not developing enough young coordinators at the defensive position. Defensive coordinators already, granted, everything I'm about to tell you is from a defensive coordinator's perspective. They often talk about how there's fewer young coaches who are gravitating towards schematic defensive coordinator positions aspirationally because they don't see as many defensive coordinators going on to become head coaches. And the math on that kind of goes back and forth depending on the time of year, really. Or sorry, not time of year, like the cycle that you're in with hiring. So I by and large, the last decade has been offensive dominant, and you want to find that young play caller because I think there is sort of this still like weird thing about they're going to attract better recruits and it's just more fun and it's accessible. Florida's a great example of this, right? Like I feel like Florida could never be a DC head coach minded program. I'll give you a little credit for it. I don't know if it would pan out like over a 10-year period.
Maybe not. Because here's my theory on this. Like,
all right,
I find Shane Beamer's decision making to hire coordinators to be really interesting. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I just find it interesting. He hires Marcus Satterfield, uninspiring. Satterfield leaves to go to Nebraska, already out at Nebraska, for a guy that, granted, is older, Dana Holgorsen, but has this innovative gene inside of his offensive, kind of makeup. Mm-hmm. He hires Dowell Loggins. Dowell Loggins was an offensive coordinator for the Tennessee Titans like 15 years ago. This is as retready and old school as it gets. It was okay. And instead of going the Ben Arbuckle route, the way Oklahoma has chosen to do, and credit to Brent Venables making one of the most important hires of his entire life and doing it with a little bit of risk, going for the upside shot. Mm-hmm. South Carolina and Shane Beamer goes even further into the retread by giving the reins to Mike Shula. Nothing about South Carolina's offensive hires under Shane Beamer is inspiring or interesting or innovative. Is that because he's trying to just kind of create a floor? Does he realize that with Lenore Sellers, he's got a chance to be very good and doesn't want to screw it up? I'm not sure.
That might be more door number two. Shula was part of the program before, though, because he was an analyst.
Yeah.
So you have, by and large, usually, when you have a situation where you don't land a hot name, you don't go out and blow people away, it's because you struck out 3-4 times on people that, maybe we'll find out. Maybe some source will tell you in 2 years, right? That, hey, he actually, before, and I'm not saying Shane Beamer's going to get fired, but I've heard this story a lot where it's like, the year before he got fired, 2 years before he got fired, he tried to hire X and X said no. The Shula hire to me kind of reeks of like, oh, I took a swing on some guys and this guy's been in the system. I know who he is. He's been in the building physically. It passes the sniff test, at least from a hiring standpoint, from my bosses. And I think you could do worse than Mike Shula when you have a known quantity at that skill position, right?
And they don't want Shane Beamer's credit on the calculus on this. I think, which is, you have a trajectory that's already sort of built and established over the last 2 seasons, and you need to just stay the course. And if you stay the course, you have a chance. If things go right and things break your way, you have a chance to be a playoff team next year. I don't know if that's going to happen. Things have to go your way. But it's possible if you kind of stay the course, don't rock the boat too much, and go the way they're going. On the other hand, Ben Arbuckle at Oklahoma, Brent Venables is betting on himself to be the defensive coordinator, which I totally agree, because Brent Venables is the guy we're talking about on defense. He is the old school defensive coach who sort of is a high floor defensive coordinator. And he's going, what? He's like, what I'm going to do? I'm going to take a quarterback that very rarely, like, in the modern SEC, I think it's going to be very interesting to see Mateer and Arbuckle go together on that offense, which is kind of old school Bob Stoops, Oklahoma to some degree, like early 2000s Oklahoma. And I don't know if it's going to work in the SEC. I don't know if it's going to work with a schedule that's very difficult against elite defensive fronts. I don't know, but I am interested. I am more interested in it today and more interested in Oklahoma because they went out and tried something different than I am with South Carolina. But again, maybe that's because Oklahoma is in a position where Venables needs to take a swing at it because he knows that if they have a bad year, he's in trouble, frankly. Shane Beamer's got a lot of equity built up, even if people around the program, the shtick is, whatever it is. I still think he's got a lot of equity built up from what they've accomplished in his 4 years there.
What is it, the Arbuckle style for you that is intriguing, or is it just the sort of all-in nature of bringing the quarterback?
It's all of it. It's hiring the bringing in a new offense whole cloth to some degree with the quarterback. It's the fact that Venables is under a lot of pressure. It's just, I think it's interesting inherently because he's young and bringing a different system. I think all of that is it just makes it fascinating. It makes it really interesting to track and watch throughout the offseason and during the
season. This is why this is where I get my revenge every offseason, because someone comes to me and they say, "What do you know about this?" And I say, "You should watch more G5 football." The Houston Baptist Western Kentucky pipeline is insane. If you want to become a star, or actually you just want to get a good second, third contract as an offensive coach in football, spend a year in Bowling Green, Kentucky. This keeps happening. I would give a little credit to Helton, the head coach, Tyson Helton, not Clay Helton, the head coach at Western Kentucky, because starting 5 years ago now, four cycles ago, Helton, who's an offensive guy by background, just said, "You know what? Screw it. I'm going to find the hottest name I can at a lower tier school and run a riskier offense." And that starts with the tree that comes out of places like Houston Baptist and Incarnate Word, these tiny schools in Texas. And I'm going to be careful here.
Eric Ward's a sitting head coach in college football now.
I know. This, take some time and look at those Western Kentucky offensive offensive assistants the last 5 years of where they've gone. A lot, three of them now have gone up to Wazoo. So there's I guess Houston Baptist, Incarnate Word, then up to Western Kentucky. Then you go to Washington State. By the way, this is how Cam Ward goes, and almost wins a Heisman. So the efficacy of that system in the SEC is tricky because technically we've already seen it and it worked. Because you're talking about everything going back to Kentucky. Then you're talking about Mississippi State with Leach.
Is this Urban Meyer at all?
A little. The run schematically, the runs are, a little bit. People kind of comp these guys to it's kind of Cliff Kingsbury, but it's not that structurally Leachian in its air raid.
It's more Lincoln Riley, honestly.
There's pieces that look like Lincoln, and there's pieces that look like Dana. It's more run-oriented than you would initially think. But I feel like I've been saying that about these guys for 3-4 years now, and I think people are starting to catch up. Yes, it could work in the SEC.
The Art Briles system is way more run-heavy than the casual observer would think.
Yes, not the same. Yeah, maybe we got to stop saying tree and start saying it's a patch of woods, because the
forest.
The Leachian tree and where Briles is doing at the high school level, and the splits on receivers and the way they ran out of it, and then Willie Taggart grabbed Kendall, and that was a whole thing. And so we go in 1,000 directions here. Most of what he is bringing to Oklahoma has been run effectively before in different iterations and pieces in the SEC. Please do not do the thing that we did for 10 years, which is, when they run at Big 12. Look, Heupel has run this. Mike Leach ran this at Mississippi State. Kiffin has run a lot of these concepts before. Off the top of my head, I would say more than half of the SEC has run something similar to this off the top of my head.
You know who's going to run a lot of this, I think, this year? Florida.
Yeah, probably because of this. Again, because you're much in the same way South Carolina is in different circumstances. You're kind of banking on, all right, well, I've got to know an entity at this one really key piece of personnel. This situation at Oklahoma is not entirely unlike Vanderbilt's. Everyone's going to go, oh, it's Vanderbilt. You're making fun of Oklahoma. I'm not.
No, these are extremely entertaining quarterbacks running what is amounting to the 2025 triple option. I don't disagree with you.
Clark was running out of time. It was not getting it done on offense. I'm not saying schematically they're similar. They're not. I guess they could be, but they're not. All right.
Okay. All right. I think there's more similarities than you.
There's going to be more downfield at Oklahoma. I promise. There'll be way more downfield. But it's the idea of the thing. If I'm a Sooner fan and I want to see a guy like Venables, who I think fits in every way, shape, and form for Oklahoma culturally, but he hasn't done it on the field. So if I want this to win and work, this reminds me a lot of Bob Stoops 2 and 3 years into his time in Norman. But then again, that 8 and 9 year period, and I may be fudging these seasons where like Leach worked for Stoops in that first iteration before, they were winning games 13-2, and then, they moved on from that. But then he hires Lincoln, and that's the era of Bob just being like, you know what? If we got to win 52-49, we're going to do it.
Well, but that was so Lincoln Riley came much, much later than the Sam Bradford era, though.
Okay. But those offenses are, as Bob gets later in his career in Oklahoma, the Big 12 it goes through this period at the end of Bob's career where you kind of are forced into playing this one style.
Yeah.
Because you're recruiting for it and against it, but based on your personnel grouping. This is also a period of time where if you were worth your salt at all in the front seven, you didn't go to college in Big 12. Yeah. Defensively, you were leaving. You were going to LSU. You were going to Alabama. So that was contributing to it a little bit as well. So Bob finally just kind of says, screw it. This is also, by the way, I would point out the period of time where Bob talks the most amount of shit about the SEC. Do you remember that year, like they played Alabama and the Sugar or whatever,
in an exhibition charity event after the season's over? Yeah.
Bob was not having it, but Bob also would not cop to the fact of if you're a 5-star defensive tackle and you're in East Texas, you're leaving because
Gerald McCoy was the last big name defensive stud.
But it's not anything they did wrong. I think it was a cycle that started they couldn't break.
Sure.
Because everyone was running an air raid variation. And the bigger body guys were starting to move out of that. And then the next thing you know, you look up and everybody's light in the ass and everybody's running a 4.25 or a 3.35.
And don't overlook the fact that Texas A&M and Missouri, right around that time, left to go to the SEC, and the SEC got a foothold in the state of Texas. Don't overlook that part of this.
No doubt.
That's a big part of this. So look, I don't know what to make of Oklahoma yet. They just had what amounts to today one of their lower rated recruiting classes relative to Oklahoma standards. In the same, it's bad optics right now for Brent Venables because they're finishing 11th. They're 16th in the nation by 24/7 Sports. They're 11th in the conference, while Texas is going to land its best class since the early 2000s. On the heels of going under 500, while Texas plays in the conference championship game and goes to the Final Four in college football for the second year in a row. It is bad optics for Brent Venables right now, for whatever reason. I mean, those are all the reasons, but it's bad optics. Ryan Grubb coming back to work with Kalen DeBoer. Fascinating quarterback battle for Alabama. Jalen Milroe, not a positive storyline in Mobile. Jalen Milroe dropping on boards across all boards.
Okay.
Even surprised me. I'll be honest. I thought Milroe could be a Jalen Hurts type of player. He's got Michael Vick's sort of skills.
Why is he dropping?
I think all the things that we had questions about him in the college game as a pro prospect, not a college prospect, put on the tape against LSU this past year. He can do that to college teams. He can't do that to NFL teams. I think all the issues were starting because these college coaches, these pro coaches, they don't know these guys. The Tennessee Titans have the first pick in the draft. They're considering Cam Ward. They have not met him yet. They've not met him. So they're just now into their third or fourth week of tape, watching these guys. And I think Milroe didn't do himself any favors in Mobile as a quarterback. I talked about it last week on the show. He couldn't hit the intermediate routes, didn't hit, and all this stuff, they're starting to get to see him and watch him in tape and everything else. And it's just, Jackson Dart went up, Jalen Milroe went down. That's what's happening in the draft conversations right now in general. So Ryan Grubb is back. Nick Sheridan, I guess, still there. But I do find this really interesting because Grubb and Kalen DeBoer have had a lot of success together it does feel like Grubb is constantly trying to go do something else. And it's just not like,
yeah, because
really
his
work.
CV, he's done this, 2 or 3 times now?
Yeah. So
he was he was a bad fit this year for the Seahawks.
Yeah.
Like,
so why will it work?
Why
will it work? There's a lot of folks who think Alabama is going to take a step forward on offense this year. And not just because of Ryan Grubb, but because of everything else. And I'm like, you're going to lose Milroe. They got great players around Milroe, especially at receiver coming back. They're loaded at receiver. But I'm curious what you make of Grubb going back and what it means for Alabama's expectations this year.
Can I just say about the same? I'm not trying to punt on it. I'm not sure if I look at Alabama as a product independent of the past, and just look at the 2024 product and necessarily think like they're dying to have Ryan Grubb be that missing piece.
I agree. I think it's a marginal improvement.
I have more questions about how they're divvying up responsibility and philosophy on the other side of the ball, to be totally honest.
Go further.
I think that you are being held to a standard. It's no sidewalk casual or even NIL collective booster is looked at Alabama this year and thought, we got to tweak the offense in order to make that step back into playoff and title contention. I think the anxiety is rooted on the defensive side of the ball. I think that there's a feeling they are going to lose a measure of ground in evaluating personnel before you get to recruiting and portal.
Top 5 recruiting class, by the way.
I know. Evaluating defensive personnel the same way that Georgia does. I think that might be the one thing they feel like they can't replicate in Nick's absence. And I think that to go and look at what I'm about to do is more a measure of the emotions, because look, we have said 1,000 gajillion times that Kalen's not going to be graded on a curve. Kalen's going to be graded on an anti-curve. Okay. Like, everything's harder for Kalen for reasons we don't necessarily need to specify. Okay.
True.
40 points to Vanderbilt. That's the one that is going to jump out at you.
Well, and how it happened, just total control of the clock. Like,
the half of football against Georgia, you could say. All right. And to be honest there, it really did feel like the wheels were falling off for 3 quarters against South Carolina. Contextually, these things all fall pretty close together, I believe. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Within the season.
So,
yeah. They were back.
Yes.
And
so
then couldn't stop the run against Tennessee either.
Nick Sheridan, like, I'm not trying to shit on Ryan Grubb in any way, shape, or form. It's just that when you have you have your head coach, you have Sheridan, who was there through this ascension, by the way, because Sheridan was at Washington and Sheridan was at Indiana, and Sheridan was the play caller at Indiana for a period of time. So he was the lead recruiter on Penix. It's not necessarily that Sheridan was awful by any stretch. Look, they humbled Blake Baker in that game in Baton Rouge. They humbled them schematically. Mm-hmm. There was really nothing that they couldn't do if they didn't want to in that game. In fact, I have a vivid memory of the Alabama offensive staff on the broadcast feed being on the sideline with 3 and 4 minutes to go from the booth. You don't see that, folks. Like, they beat their ass so bad in Baton Rouge. The offensive assistants from the press box were on the field with time remaining in the game to just go and like high five each other and shit.
Yep.
Okay. So when the Grubb news broke, I thought like, all right, well, they want to keep the band together. To me, Braden, you kind of teased at it. This is positioning for Ryan Grubb to maybe find his own way, pivoting off of saying, well, he was a play calling OC at Alabama. But this is not the Alabama this was not the side of the ball I thought Alabama would aggressively diagnose in the offseason.
Okay. I mean, I think it was opportunity. To your point, I think it was Ryan Grubb didn't work. Seattle came open. Hey, Kalen, man, I can't believe they fired me. Like, what are you up to?
Oh, yeah, totally.
Hey, you want to come on back down and get the band back together? Let's go.
Yeah,
I think it's a positive. I think it's a net positive. I do think like Deontay Lawson could be the best defensive player maybe in the country. Like they've got a corner. I'm drawing a blank on the freshman corner that was really good, number 2 for Alabama. I don't think they're going to be. They replaced 5 guys in the secondary last year. Like they replaced like Branch was a starting player in the NFL for a great football team. Like you had Quinyon Mitchell start. He's going to start in the. I mean, not Quinyon Mitchell. Terrion Arnold was the first round pick who's going to be, played for the Lions deep into the in a high level. Like they lost the entire secondary and they played a true freshman or two, and they're very good. They went and got some guys in the port. I think the defense is going to be better now. They got to replace Campbell. They got to replace Moore. They got to replace some other pieces. But is losing Tim Smith like they did under Saban when they were losing Jonathan Allen and Deron Payne and all these other guys? I don't think that's the same thing. I think they can replace some of those guys.
I think they're probably close to where they were at this year. I don't think adding Ryan Grubb is going to make them a playoff.
No. I just think Alabama in general is going to – I think it solidifies and stabilizes a little bit. And when you're replacing Milroe, to have all those weapons and break in a new quarterback, it is good to have another good, smart mind and get the band back together to some degree, is all I'm saying.
It will be –
their schedule's interesting, dude. Their road games are real interesting.
How about that week one?
Well – I don't know, they could beat Florida State.
It's the first ever anxiety bowl in week one that I can remember because both head coaches have to win that game.
They got to go to Georgia, to South Carolina. I think it's at Missouri as well. Where else do they got to go? They've got an interesting schedule this year. Alabama does. And the pressure doesn't go down after you win only 9 regular season games at Alabama.
The horror.
Where can people find you, Godfrey? What are all those things? What's all the stuff you're working on? What are you doing right now?
It's quiet right now, planning for the future. Who Killed College Football obviously was we really enjoyed season 1. We put up a little addendum that'll be in the feed if you subscribe by next week. There's a little extra bonus episode. Just wrapped up with the Washington Post because it's the end of football season. In the lab, taking a break for a couple weeks. More stuff soon. That's the best way I can say it. At 38 Godfrey on Twitter.
At 38 Godfrey, at Braden Gall. Thumbs up on the YouTube page. Please give us all the shares. Give us all the shares. And, of course, ML Rose in Nashville. If you're in town, please swing by ML Rose. 6 great locations all across the city. A 7th location coming to my neighborhood soon in the next couple months. Can't wait for that, so check that out. Otherwise, for Steven, I'm Braden. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you guys next time.
Thanks.